Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Anastasopoulos, the chair of the ICCI, and I'd like to welcome you all to this ICCI workshop entitled Your Daily Rate, What's the Magic Formula? The ICCI is managed on a strictly volunteer basis by CES members who are passionate about strengthening the sense of community among independent evaluation consultants in Canada. So following the elections that we held last June during our first AGM, there are now 8 folks who volunteer for the ICCI steering committee. And we meet on a regular basis to plan and deliver activities for you that are aimed at providing mutual support and fostering community among those interested in or practicing independent consulting. So this is the ICCI's first full year in action. And for this first year, our members can expect to be invited to online learning and networking events about every 3 months. Another facet of the ICCI that is already available to all members is our online discussion forum, which is hosted on the CES website. So this is a space for all ICCI members to post your questions related to independent consulting, to answer your peers' questions, and to learn from this ongoing online discussion. Signing up for the forum is easy. You just log into the CES website as a member, click on the Communities tab in the Members Area section, and then select Subscribe to the ICCI discussion forum. So last winter, we sent out a member survey, and we learned that pricing and fee development is the topic of interest to the largest number of ICCI members. So without further ado, let's now turn to part 1 of our 2-part workshop, Your Daily Rate, What's the Magic Formula?, delivered by Gail Vallance Barrington, who's the past chair of the ICCI, and Don Murray, who's the ICCI steering committee member. This workshop is going to be in English, but feel free to ask questions in either English or French, and there's going to be a Q&A period at the end of the presentation. I'll hand it over to you, Don and Gail.
So I'll just start with the land acknowledgement. I live in Calgary, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'll acknowledge that we live, work, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Optimizuwak Métis government, Districts 5 and 6, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Personally, I humbly acknowledge my responsibility to know the truth about the harm that was and continues to be caused to Indigenous peoples, and commit to moving forward in partnership in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration.
And I'm Don Murray, and I live and work in Kamloops. Kamloops is located on the Tk'emlúps Secwépemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwépemc Nation. I'm committed to establishing and supporting respectful relationships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And a key aspect of this commitment is acknowledging the truth of Canada's history with Indigenous peoples and proactively working to change harmful behavior, attitudes, and policies. I'll just quickly introduce a bit more about my background, and then Gail can take it from there. I'm with Harry Cummington Associates. We're a small consulting firm based in Guelph, Ontario, but as I said, I'm currently living in Kamloops, BC, where we opened a second office in 2017. I've been working in the evaluation and research field as a private consultant independent consultant for almost 25 years, and I've been a credentialed evaluator for over 10 years. I've been involved as a project lead manager on over 80 major evaluation and research projects, covering a broad range of sectors, including health, education, social services, finance, manufacturing, and natural resources. And with that, I'll hand it over to Gail.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I'm Gail Vallance Barrington, and was an independent consultant for 35 years. I had my own consulting business, Barrington Research Group, here in Calgary, mainly focusing on education, post-secondary education, health and health services, and I can't even tell you how many more, well over 130 projects and about 600 reports during that time. I also wrote a book on consulting, which is called Consulting Startup and Management, a guide for independent consultants and applied researchers, and it's available through Sage. And so I've done workshops for many years on independent consulting topics, and it's something that I just love to do and to share my experiences, good and bad, with others. So today we're going to, well, first to say this is a two-part webinar. So it's today and on Thursday as well. And you're going to have homework to do. So if you can scroll up to the top of the chat box, you'll see that Dawn has posted the worksheets, which we're going to be referring to today and on Thursday as well. So it'd be a great idea if you could download them. You're going to, when you click on it, then it takes you to where do you want to save this file. So you save it to your computer and then open it. So if you wouldn't mind doing that right now, that'd be great. So today we're going to work on worksheets 1, 2, and 3, which is, as you can see, why you need to have them. First of all, we're going to talk about your billable time, which is a very interesting concept. And so we'll get into that. And then there's a worksheet for you to calculate your annual billable time, which you can take away with you and work on tonight. And then we're going to talk about your typical operational costs and calculate what those are. Again, we'll talk about it, and then there's a worksheet for you to work on as well. So these are the components of your daily rate. Now, before I even say that, I want to mention that there are many ways to bill your time. I mean, you could simply bill, the same hourly rate that you've heard other people talking about, and that might be one place to start. Or you could just sort of dream up what you think you're worth and charge that and see how that goes over. You could look up online and get some information from other consultants. If you look up the government business websites, for example, they have information on typical costs. But our position is that each of you is individual and unique, and each of you has unique financial needs in terms of what you're going to need in order to survive and to live a comfortable life, but to not bill rates that are so high that you lose your clients because they refuse to pay them. So it's a balancing act, right? So today we're talking about your daily rate, and these are the components. First of all, billable time, and then operational costs, and those are our topics today. And we're going fairly slowly through these topics so that you will have time to really process them and to ask questions. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about salary and profit, and then finally calculate what your daily rate would be based on the formula that we'll be building. Okay, so if you have a copy of worksheet 1, it would be a great time to take it out and have a look at it. So we're going to calculate your billable time because you don't work every day in the year. So how many days in the year do you actually work? And this is the process you can go through in order to do that. So first of all, we take how many days there are in the year and how many weeks and so on. Now you'll see worksheet 1. Are you all right if I'm now talking about the worksheet? You've got the worksheet and we can go forward. Everybody cool?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So you'll see that it's broken down into the item and then the number of weeks and then the number of days. So with 52 weeks in the year, we only have to begin with a base of 260 weekdays because I'm assuming that you are not regularly going to be working on your weekends. Now, of course, you will work on weekends when you have a deadline and you're pressured and so on, but we're not going to calculate that into our formula because there are really important mental health issues and family requirements that you need to meet as well. And you need to be able to organize your work life so that you have a balance and you have time off. So considering that we're starting with 260, we also want you to be able to take a vacation. I mean, you're looking at this as a long-term career. You need to be able to get away every year for a while. And this is 4 weeks, which you could, of course, and probably will split up. I usually took two weeks at Christmas and then 2 in the summer, and tried to go someplace every year so that I got out of town. Then when you think about stat holidays in Canada, there's basically one every month. And so it more or less breaks down to about 10 days of holidays that are national holidays or provincial holidays and so on. Now, you need to be healthy. So you should be, working out and taking your vitamins and eating your Wheaties and so on, because we're only giving you 1 week to be sick. Now, especially in the year that we had COVID, or the 2 years, most of us were probably sick longer than that. But this is theoretically what we're looking for. So when you take all that into account, we only have 45 weeks in the year, and then that's 225 days. But you need to run your business, and you need to generate work, find projects and contracts. So as an independent consultant, it's typically suggested that it's probably going to take you about 10 weeks out of your year for business, research, marketing, writing proposals, and really basically looking for work, which isn't really that much. It's about a week a month, more or less, that you're going to be marketing. And of course, marketing is the lifeblood to your work, because it all depends on you. It's not like you have a boss who's going to put it on your desk and say, here, do this. You've got to find it, which is, of course, one of the reasons we love consulting, because you never know what's going to crop up next, and it makes life so much more interesting. But you need to learn how to market successfully so that you have a constant stream of projects coming in, and in some kind of a regular manner. And now you also need to manage your business itself. And so you're going to have to send out your invoices. You have to pay your bills. You need to buy office furniture or whatever it is that you need. There are always demands that are to be made on you as a business person, which of course is one of the shifts in philosophy for some of you that may be for the first time. You're now running a small business, and you're a business person, and it gives you a different perspective. And so when you're reading the paper or looking at the news online, you will suddenly notice that business news is much more interesting than it used to be, because you are part of the business world. Okay, so the first thing is, what is your available time? When we take all of this into account, you've got 160 billable days. Now, remember, of course, this is theoretical, but this is your baseline where we know you're starting from. And so that's 38 weeks or 160 days. And then if you look at worksheet 2, it's broken down for you to take this away and figure out for yourself exactly how many days you're going to be able to bill for in a year. Now, if you are planning to work as a consultant part-time, what I suggest you do, try this out, is do the full calculation as if you were going to be working full-time, and then take a proportion of that. So if you were going to consult 2 days a week, it would be 2/5 or 40% of the total number of days would be your goal. That way it doesn't influence, the calculations in the same way as it would if you tried to do it for dividing by 2/5 of everything all the way through. So that's basically your billable time. When you start from zero, you need to find out well, for one thing, who are your competitors? And this takes a lot of sort of subtle work in terms of asking people questions, taking people to lunch, finding out what's going on, who's also in independent consulting. You may have run into them, when you go to CES events, for example, which is a good reason why you ought to be active in your provincial chapter. So that's one place to start, but there's a lot of information on how to run a small business. And in the States, the Small Business Administration has a terrific website, and the Government of Canada also has lots of information, which you need to start researching, reading up on, and buying books and reading information about managing a small business and how to be how to market and so on. There's just tons of information to try to understand in the end who your market is going to be. You need to be able to narrow things down to match your skills with what the demands are in the marketplace. And that takes a lot of time and thought. Do you factor in the time to complete an RFP? Well, that's part of the marketing, yes. Definitely. So it's going to be an ongoing part of your work, not just this year, but every year you will be. Don just told me this morning he's working on 2 RFPs right now. It never stops. And so there will always be time put aside for marketing. Now, this isn't in this webinar, but another thing you should be doing is keeping track of your time. And so you're able to assess how much time you're spending on each project. Okay. For marketing and research, admin, etc., this may vary by week rather than be an actual week or day allotted to this. Yes, absolutely. Although there are some things I've always found have to be attended to first thing in the morning. When you come and sit down at your desk, the first thing I always did was make sure that I read all my emails and paid all my bills, and kept very close watch of my cash flow. And cash flow is yet another topic, which we definitely need to talk about another time, managing cash flow. Anyway, so let's move on from that. Once you have your available time and then you work out your billable time, you're ready to move on. And I'm going to turn it over to Dawn to talk about operational costs.
All right, thanks, Gail. So really in this next component, we do want to sort of have a quick look at the different types of operational costs that you are likely to encounter with your small business, and that you ultimately need to factor into your daily rate calculation. Some of these costs will be fixed. These are expenses that will remain consistent regardless of the volume of work that you take on. So this included things like office rent, utilities, insurance. These are fixed items, typically known items at a known rate that have to be paid out every month or on an annual basis, compared to your variable costs, which are expenses that can fluctuate depending on the type and the volume of the work that you're undertaking. So certain office expenses may go up or down, advertising costs, even professional development in terms of where you want to and how much you want to invest in that kind of activity. This part of the presentation all relates to worksheet 3, and when you open that up, you'll see that it has all the items I'm going to present listed, without also some under major headings and then some minor headings as well. So I'm just going to talk through some of these costs. Also to keep in mind that this presentation isn't covering what I would call startup costs. So these are costs that would ultimately need to be part of your overall budget. They tend to be one-time costs or items that have a long shelf life. For example, your business registration, that's a one-time fee. And then certain equipment like computer, office furnishings, even your initial website development, you might consider that to be a part of your sort of startup cost. To get going. We're not covering that in detail. This is sort of, once you are up and operating, these are the sorts of costs that you're going to have to keep in mind as sort of from month to month, having a look at it, making sure that are being looked after. So starting with office rent and utilities, this is sort of a depends, right? Are you actually in a situation where it's necessary for you to go out and rent office space because it's not practical for you to work from home, right? There certainly are some cost savings if you're working from home, but it's not practical if you're not able to have a dedicated workspace at home. It needs to be a comfortable environment for you that you and your other family members respect, right? You need to have minimal distractions if you're working from home. So in some cases, the best option might be to have an offsite place that you're renting as your workspace. There are all sorts of issues that can take into consideration when renting space, location, whether it has certain utilities included or whether they're added on cost, is parking available. So when you're going out and looking for an office, you need to be mindful of what's included and what's not included in that price, because sometimes parking isn't always included. Sometimes utilities are an add-on. So you need to be mindful of asking those questions for you're looking for a space. And also at this point, do you want to have an office space that is just a single workstation, or does it provide you opportunities where you can expand it to have a second or a third workstation? And you've got that sort of luxury ready for you if you want to take that next step. And then the other thing I would say as well, you need to have a workspace where your information, whatever documentation associated with reports and so on, can be kept secure. Again, I said it needs to be a dedicated place where that your office work is separate from your domestic life. Office expenses include things like supplies, printing costs, postage, courier. Although interestingly, we rarely do have expenses that are related to a postage and courier. Most of the information communication that we work with now is electronic. So that's certainly a cost that has gone down in years for us. And then typically, even with printing, it's something that we would do internally for our own use. But when it comes to printing reports, even that has largely gone to an e-file format, where we're rarely, as a deliverable, expected to produce an electron or a hard copy report. Communication expenses relates to telephone and fax, cell phone, and internet cable. Again, a big change here I find is that we've moved away entirely from a landline and a fax. Almost never use fax these days, but certainly it is important to have a good cell phone and a robust cell phone package. I use my cell phone as my business phone, and I guess it depends if you have a comfort level with that you feel that you need to have a second cell phone for business exclusive. But I have found that it works, that I'm able to work with a single package, so long as it's robust enough where I have data that can allow me, if I'm out of the office and I need to Skype or have a team meeting, that I've got sufficient a sufficient package that will let me do that. And then, of course, you need internet for your home package. Cable, not so much, but certainly internet. Under license renewals, this refers to a lot of the software elements that you'll likely need for running your business. So at a minimum, something like Office 365 and your antivirus protection. You may want a Zoom package, a virtual meeting platform, again, with robust capacity that allows you to have extended meeting times. It allows you to have extended number of participants. So something you'll need to look into. There might be that with an existing Teams program that's under Office 365, but it's worth shopping around to see what the different platforms offer, and if there's a package that offers something that is something that of greater preference to you. For me, I prefer Zoom because I got used to it during COVID. I'm comfortable with the system. I know where all the functions are, and every now and again I have to do. I work with Teams, but I have a personal preference with Zoom. But it's something for you to decide on if you want to sort of go out there and purchase some sort of an initial package. And then the other sort of elements of license renewal, I would say, relate to things like SPSS, NVivo, Simple Survey. There's all sorts of different packages that you can get with these software applications. I encourage you, where it is an option, if they offer a monthly subscription, look at those options, because there can be significant or substantial savings if you're using it month to month as you need it, depending upon the project. With SPSS, for example, I might use it 3 months out of a year. And the great thing about that is I can buy a package from month to month to get me through that, the length of time that I need that package without having to buy a full annual license for it. Of course, if you are at the point where you're going to take on employees, you need to pay salaries and ideally some sort of benefits package for your employees, right? And again, it comes back to if you decide that you want to build a team of consultants around you and have them as your sort of your workforce, versus the other direction you could possibly take is hiring in those resources and expertise as you need them, and just on a contract by contract basis, you would hire those individuals in. But once you take that step and you actually take on salaried employees, you have to keep in mind that you're also then stepping into the role of a human resource manager, right? And there are other responsibilities associated with that you're taking on that workload of hiring, onboarding, supervising, and retaining qualified personnel, and then ensuring that you have attractive wages and benefits, for recruitment and retention. I think, as Gail mentioned, you really need to have a sense of what the market is offering to be competitive and fair when you start moving in that direction with taking on salaried employees. Looking at having a health benefits package, typically an employer sponsored package would include medical, optical, dental, right? So there are various sort of packages out there, benefit packages out there for small businesses, and you should look at those, compare premiums and the types of benefits that are being included, and then pick the preferred options that you want with your or for your employees. The other important thing I would include here under this benefits piece is professional development, some form of a professional development allowance. So there can be a broad range of incentives that you can offer your employees, including covering annual membership fees for a professional organization like CES, and or covering registration fees for conferences and professional development events. So again, that's could be an entire webinar on its own, talking about those types of things where we're getting into what you can do to attract and retain employees. Advertising is pretty crucial when starting your own little business. But there are initial costs sort of with the website hosting. And then, as I mentioned, I almost consider it a startup cost to get that white website initially running and bringing in, if you feel that you're comfortable and you have adequate skill sets to build your own website, or bringing in external expertise to do that with you. Again, one of these things around how many hats do you want to wear? How many of these jobs do you want to take on? It might just be more cost effective to hire in the expertise to do that work for you. There's lots of sort of little firms out there that can assist you in this way in building out your website. So you really need to think about whether you want to take that on or bring in an expert to do that for you. But once you even have that website up, it needs to be a product that when someone lands on that page, it needs to look fresh. It needs to look like you've been paying attention to the material there, that it's updated, it's profiling your current activities and service information, and maybe even providing some testimonials from people who have used your service in the past. Other advertising activities, I see, for example, conference promotion and sponsorship opportunities as being quite relevant. So be it the provincial chapter or being at the national chapter, being aware of the different conference packages that are being made available where you can promote your business either in the program or through an information booth. If it's an in-person conference, look at those opportunities for advertising. I would also quickly mention that there's, in terms of the cost, think about charitable donations. The benefits of donating locally in your community or to a sector can be substantial, right? It helps you to connect you to your community, to the sector. It helps you build your network, and it helps to strengthen your business image and even your company morale. So think about charitable donations as part of an operational cost at some point. There are then the fees associated with maintaining your professional memberships. I'm currently a member with the Canadian Evaluation Society, but historically I have at some point points been involved as a member with the American Evaluation Association and also with the European Association as well. It has sort of I would say in my early years of consulting, I went broad and I belonged to all three associations. In more recent years, I've scaled that back to CES, even though I still follow the websites of the other two associations. I've scaled it back to just the Canadian Evaluations Society at this point. But it's something to keep in mind that that is a cost you need to be a part of your calculation. Under accounting and legal fees. Now, whether you decide to do your own bookkeeping or outsource this activity really depends on your skill set and your comfort level in this area. Once you get into, if you make that decision that you're going to take this on, you need to be mindful of that there's also the cost of purchasing and maintaining the accounting software license, right? I personally find it to be very helpful to have an accountant. But again, it really depends on your skill set in this area. I think you also need to consider, again, getting back to this piece about how many hats do you want to wear, right? It might be more cost effective to have an accountant look after your bookkeeping, your payroll, your tax details for a relatively small fee, which then enables you to focus more of your time on consulting activity. But again, it comes back to your comfort level with taking on that role. And you're going to have to sort of, read up on and be aware of proper accounting procedures and processes, right? So just something to think about whether you hire that work in or you try and take that on yourself. When it comes to legal fees, a lot of this for me really relates around having oversight over contracts. And it's something that's over time, I feel that we have come to rely on less frequently because we have gotten more familiar with contract content. We know what should be in a solid contract. We are aware of when we see a contract that is missing content that should be in there. So it might be something that in the early part of your independent career, you maybe rely on legal services to provide some overview or to review contracts, particularly if it's a complex contract, to make sure there's adequate, you're adequately covered in that contract. But generally over time, you should develop greater capacity for reviewing contracts, and you may not need the same extent of legal sort of assistance, again, depending on the complexity of the contract. But still, it's a fee that you need to be mindful of when you're thinking about your total operating costs. There are several insurance expenses you need to be aware of, starting with your personal health and life insurance. Again, this can vary depending upon the package. You should have some form of general liability insurance. So this protects you from lawsuits related to bodily injuries that might occur on your premises to either your customers or your employees. And sometimes this could be a specific requirement that is in a request for a proposal. So before you can actually get to a signed contract, you need to provide some sort of an assurance that you have general liability insurance in order for that contract to go forward. Similarly, it might be the case that it could be a requirement that you have commercial property insurance that covers the physical things that your business owns, like the furniture, other equipment, and this will cover the cost of repair and replacement. And then you should also have professional liability insurance, also known as errors and omissions insurance. So this protects professional service firms from claims of breach of professional services or wrongful business practices or even conflict of interest. One thing you may not need is workers' compensation. So this is a provincial insurance plan that provides employees with income if they experience injury or illness while at work. It's not required if you are self-employed. So you're not quite required to have it for yourself. And certain service industries, like certain consulting industries, are exempt from having to have this insurance, but you can voluntarily apply if you want to protect your employees. Again, it depends about your preferences, the features that you want to put in place for your workforce if you're going into a salaried employed situation. Other insurance might be automobile insurance. I've really discounted this. I so rarely use a motor vehicle for my work activities. For my personal use, I absolutely have to have it, but I don't have a business sort of specific vehicle. So much of my work has gone virtual now. And when I do have to travel, I might even factor in just simply renting a vehicle on the spot if I need it, if I'm traveling to out of Kamloops to another city, of course, rather than driving myself. It's something that I'm mindful of. If there's an automobile or a travel component related to a motor vehicle, when I am budgeting and submitting my proposal, I'm making sure those costs are accounted for in that proposal, and having that discussion with the client to make sure that they're okay with me covering off those types of expenses. Business tax, or sorry, loans, lease payments, bank charges. So depends if you borrow money to start up your business. So this might be a part of the payback that you're doing to pay back that principal and interest if you have borrowed money to get the business going. If you're entered into a lease agreement for some of the equipment that you bought, if you're leasing your furniture or other equipment, then that'll be a monthly charge you have to look after. And then, of course, there'll be the standard sort of bank charges that you pay at a monthly rate related to maintaining your business account at the financial institution. Business tax, of course, is something you need to be mindful of. This, again, and will depend on the amount of revenue you generate from your consulting business. And generally, if your total taxable revenues exceed 30,000 in a calendar quarter, then you must register your businesses and start collecting the GST, HST from your revenue. One general rule of thumb for small businesses, this is to set aside about 25% of your annual income for tax purposes. That's just a general rule of thumb there. Other operational costs to consider are, as I mentioned, things like a motor vehicle. But again, it sort of depends on usage, depends on the project, how much you're going to need a motor vehicle for conducting your work. It's very project specific, I find. And I find it to be something that I rarely use now these days with virtual meetings. And so that if I do have expenses related to a motor vehicle, it's typically something that I invoice actual expenses and build it into my proposal, that there might be a cost element that I need to travel. You might want to, or I would strongly suggest having some form of a contingency fund. So setting up a business emergency fund. So a reserve of cash that's kept in savings for sort of unexpected financial challenges. Like, for example, dealing with periods where there is slow business activity, or handling client problems like canceled contracts. So this can be built up incrementally, but I would suggest doing something where you're actually adding something to a little cash reserve, that you've got something on hand that you can go to. Again, one sort of general rule of thumb is that you may want to keep back or try and build up as much as 10% of your annual revenue in a contingency fund, so you've got something to draw on when if funds are short. And the other quick thing to look after under operational costs, it relates to retirement savings, right? So setting aside some amount of funds for your retirement, and this will be dependent on a number of factors, but you should be looking at preparing a personal plan that takes into account your work projects, your lifestyle considerations, and any debts, as well as whether you currently have a pension plan, right? So it's worth talking with a financial planner, or at least researching your options around setting up some sort of retirement savings. Now, I just quickly mention that in the worksheet 3 that we've shared with you, it provides this itemized list and a much more detailed list in terms of breaking out headings and subheadings. It's not meant to be exhaustive, so there could be other costs that you may want to factor in there that are not sort of mentioned in a line item. For example, when you're looking at your office rental and utilities, you may have to include a line item around paid parking. It may not be included as part of what's covered under that office rental. And alongside those itemized costs, there are three other columns. So there's a column that identifies what that cost is on a monthly basis, and then also the roll up then into the annual cost. And even a checklist column where, is this an absolute necessary cost, or is this sort of something that is, depending upon the project, it may not be something that you need to worry about in this particular year. So just something to think about when you're going through that worksheet, that it's going to depend. Some of those costs are going to depend upon your personal preferences and the situation where, do you have access to home office, for example, or no, you really do need to work outside the home, and then look at that, having an offsite workspace. So with that, yep, we'll move into the Q&A now.
Oh, I just want to make a few comments.
Yep.
For those of you who are just starting out, it may feel like this is a huge amount of information, and you may feel that well, basically that it's overwhelming, that you can't possibly be thinking about all these things at the same time. But I just want to assure you that it's kind of organic, and as your needs arise, you will discover ways to address them. So you're not going to start out tomorrow with all of this clearly locked into place. You're going to start out with what's absolutely essential and move outward from that. Now, there were a couple of questions in the chat box, Don. And I can just comment on my own experience that what I did was figure out what square footage my office is compared to the whole house, and then take all of our household expenses and take that proportion of it as what I could claim. And I have to say, in terms of office space, that I think I've gone through every possible permutation and combination, starting off very small, and I got a month-to-month office and an office incubator, which provided all sorts of services that I couldn't afford to provide myself. In those days, a photocopier was an expensive item, and then slowly moved to larger space as I had more staff and had more contracts, and therefore could afford more. And then eventually, when I decided to downsize, I slowly shrank back, and here I am in my basement, where I've been for the last 5 years. But I still am able to use the square footage of this office space as a basis for a tax calculation. And there were several responses in the chat box, all suggesting, yes, go for the website because it gives you more professional credibility.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, there's a whole webinar we could have on that, and I would say as well, LinkedIn is great for certain things. It's great for networking, absolutely. But your website is something that you have, once whoever lands on that website, that is all your material. I mean, you are showcasing your business, you're keeping it as fresh as you can. And I think it's sort of, it is your calling card. And we have had clients approach us through Google searches. You'll be surprised where work comes from at times. And we have people who have, that's how they found us. They just did sort of a Google search on keywords that they entered in a particular area, and we came up shortlisted. So I think there is value in having a website.
Now, this is something that's always a pain to do, but it is essential, because after we figure out, first of all, what's your daily rate going to be, and then you bid on a contract and you get it, and it has X number of days, you need to be able to track, indeed, how much time you actually spend on that contract. And if you're starting to get into an overload situation where you're working more time than you had contracted for, the implications that that's going to have on you and your business. And so it's really an essential part.
And I would say the timesheets, because they're task oriented, you're documenting time on task for doing interviews, time on task for doing report writing, time on task for doing survey. It helps me sort of come up with when I'm formulating pricing
Yes.
If someone is asking for X number of interviews or X number of surveys, I've got the actual real world documentation of it. This is the time I had to invest to get through these number of interviews, which were an hour each in length. And I can come up with a fairly accurate price on that. So it's really helpful for, it's sort of a, a feedback loop on telling you this is the actual time and cost of doing that work.
That's right. It's really important. And happily, though, there are lots of software packages out there now for keeping track of your time. And, you can get it so you can enter it on your phone, for example, as well, as on your computer. And it's really pretty easy in comparison, does all sorts of lovely graphs and so on. And someone mentioned that they had one federal government contract where they demanded to know your actual time on a project. So you never know what kind of demands like that will crop up. And so I would say always be careful. Try to be as safe as possible in terms of the way you manage your business. Keep your files organized, pay your bills, make sure you have insurance. And that's one other comment I want to make. I've seen it happen so often that people don't look into liability insurance, errors and emissions insurance is the same thing, until they get a contract in front of them. They worked so hard, they won the proposal, now they're going to do the project, and they read the fine print in the contract and it says you have to have liability insurance. And so time and time again, I've seen it on the American Evaluation listserv, somebody panicking and saying, I have to have insurance by tomorrow, in order to get this contract. So, save yourself the grief and start looking into it now. And typically it's easier to get liability insurance through some kind of a group that you may belong to. So, for example, what I did for many years was I got it through the certified management consultants, because I was a certified management consultant. Yeah, the answer is you don't double bill. I mean, this is absolutely anathema. You cannot do that, or you get into the situation of being one of those consultants you read about in the newspaper who's being arrested, for illegal practice. And so you need to make a decision. Well, did I spend, and I used to do it in 15-minute increments. So you say to yourself, did I spend most of that quarter hour on this or that? And you just, make a note. But you have to do your timesheet every day, otherwise it's just too much work and you get boggled and you can't remember what you did yesterday and so on. So it's kind of it's a habit.
The nice thing about being independent, I find, is just that we can be flexible with how big or how small we want to be. And, there have been times within the history of the small business where we've had upwards of 5 full-time employees. There have been times when we've gone down to just 2 full-time employees. And at times we found it just makes more sense to hire in the work because we know it's only project specific. The work is going to run out in 6 months. And then here, if you brought on full-time employees, you're thinking about, okay, where's the next big project going to come from to keep those 4 or 5 people employed? So it's, as I said, how many hats do you want to wear? Do you want to be a human resource manager? Do you want to be the bookkeeper? Or do you want to, hire someone in to do those tasks? So it's, I would, to me, it's small steps versus sort of moving into a major expansion quickly, I would think.
Yeah, I love subcontracting too. I mean, I've been both ways. I had at one time a staff of 20 and spent all my time, of course, managing them and not having any fun doing evaluation. So I managed to work my way out of that as quickly as I could. But when you hire a subcontractor, they have a specific skill that you need on this project. Just make sure that you always have a good contract with them. And it's even worth it to sit down with a lawyer and go over what your subcontract with the subcontractor includes to make sure that everybody's interests are adequately covered. So there's your homework. Finish your billable time worksheet and calculate your operational costs. And then on Thursday, we're going to carry on and put all the pieces together. Any questions arising from today? We're going to look at a rate calculation sample and then give you the worksheet to calculate your own rate and talk about feedback and questions and what kind of independent consultant training you think you'd also like to have, what webinars we can have in the future. We're just so thrilled that there's so much interest in Canada now from independent consultants in evaluation who want to get together and share our experiences. Can you show them our, yeah, here we go. So that's the book that I wrote a long time ago now, but I believe it's still available through Sage, also Amazon. And here are our contact, here's our contact information if you want to get hold of us. So I just want to thank you all for attending.
Yes, thank you. And we'll see you on Thursday.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.